Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication. Most people assume silence means surrender, that when you stop speaking, you've given up. But the truth is, silence can be the loudest declaration of self-respect you'll ever make. When someone begins to take you for granted, the instinctive reaction is to speak louder, to prove your worth, to remind them of what they're losing. You think if you explain harder, they'll finally understand your heart. But the more you talk, the more they tune out, and the more you start to lose yourself in trying to make them see your value. That's when silence becomes your weapon, your shield and your strength. When you stop defending your value, you start discovering it. The need to constantly explain yourself is born out of fear. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being replaced, the fear of being forgotten. But the moment you realize that your worth does not depend on someone's recognition of it, you start walking in quiet confidence. You begin to understand that you don't need to convince anyone of what's already true. You were valuable before they met you, and you will be valuable long after they're gone. Silence is the bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. When a person takes you for granted, they become too familiar with your giving nature. They expect you to always show up, to always answer, to always fix things. But when you choose silence, you interrupt that pattern. You no longer feed the habit they built out of your kindness. You stop being predictable. Suddenly, your absence begins to echo louder than your presence ever did. They start to feel the void that your energy used to fill. They begin to replay every moment they dismissed, every word they ignored, every effort they undervalued. Silence holds a mirror up to their behavior, and the reflection isn't always pretty. Your silence doesn't just protect your peace, it also exposes theirs. When you stop reacting, you remove their ability to control the emotional rhythm of the relationship. They can no longer push your buttons because you've disconnected the wiring. They can no longer manipulate your emotions because you've taken back your power. And power doesn't shout, it moves quietly, gracefully, and intentionally. Real strength doesn't need to prove itself. It simply exists. In silence, you start hearing your own voice again. The one that's been drowned out by arguments, explanations, and emotional noise. You remember who you were before you were trying so hard to be understood. You reconnect with your intuition, that gentle inner knowing that always told you when something wasn't right. You realize that silence isn't passive. It's deeply active. It's a time of recalibration, of realignment, of choosing peace over pressure. When you stop trying to be heard, you start listening to your own soul. Every time you choose silence over reaction, you send a message that speaks volumes. I will not fight for a place that requires me to lose myself. You're not punishing anyone. You're protecting your energy. You're reminding yourself that self-respect isn't about arrogance. It's about boundaries. It's about knowing when to speak and when to walk away. Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you're choosing to say nothing to those who no longer deserve access to your words. People who take you for granted often believe your love is endless, your patience is unbreakable, your presence is permanent. They think you'll always be there, no matter how carelessly they handle your heart. But when you go silent, the illusion shatters. They begin to feel uncertainty. And that uncertainty breeds awareness. They begin to realize that you were not a constant but a choice. You didn't have to give your time, your energy, your care. You chose to. And when you stop choosing, they start questioning everything. Silence has a strange way of awakening guilt in those who never listened when you spoke. When you were vocal, they dismissed your words as drama. But when you go quiet, they start to wonder what changed. They start to feel the tension of your absence. They may not admit it, but internally, they begin to chase the closure your silence denies them. That's when the power shifts. That's when you reclaim your position. This is not about revenge or emotional games. It's about evolution. It's about reaching a place where your peace becomes more valuable than proving your point. You begin to understand that not every battle deserves your presence. You no longer try to win arguments with those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't compete for attention. You command it through your absence. Silence becomes the language of dignity. It says, I respect myself too much to keep explaining what should be obvious. When you finally step into this level of calm confidence, you radiate an energy that can't be ignored. People may not understand it, but they will feel it. They'll sense that you've risen above the need for validation. And in that stillness, you begin to attract peace, clarity, and strength. Your silence teaches others how to treat you. Not through confrontation, but through elevation. You're no longer speaking to be heard. You're existing to be valued. And in that quiet, your self-respect becomes your loudest voice. When you finally decide to pull your energy back, something powerful begins to happen. The same person who once ignored your presence suddenly starts to feel your absence. They don't understand it at first. They can't quite put their finger on what's missing, but they feel it. That's because energy speaks louder than words ever can. Every time you gave attention, comfort, or love, you were feeding a connection that depended on your energy to survive. When you stop giving, the energy dies slowly, and that silence becomes the loudest message you'll ever send. Energy is invisible, yet it carries weight. It lives in your tone, your attention, your consistency, and your availability. When you used to respond instantly, when you used to initiate conversations, when you used to care even when they didn't, that was energy being invested. But when you realize that your energy is being wasted on someone who doesn't reciprocate, you begin to understand that withdrawing is not cruelty, it's wisdom. You are no longer feeding a connection that only drains you. You are choosing to redirect your power back to yourself. And once that shift happens, they can feel it, even from a distance. When you stop giving attention to someone who took it for granted, it disrupts their emotional rhythm. They were used to your energy being predictable, constant, and easy to reach. Your presence gave them comfort, even when they didn't appreciate it. But the moment that energy disappears, confusion sets in. They start wondering what happened, why you're different, why the energy feels colder. They may not say it, but they feel it deep within. Silence is not empty. It's full of the lessons they refused to learn when you were still speaking. Your withdrawal doesn't just starve their ego, it awakens their conscience. When you stop reacting, when you stop trying to explain yourself, when you stop showing up for someone who stopped showing up for you, they are forced to sit in the void of their own behavior. And that silence becomes a mirror. It reflects every mistake, every careless word, every moment they took you for granted. You no longer need to point it out. The absence of your energy becomes the evidence. This is why silence is so uncomfortable for those who once underestimated your worth. They begin to replay every situation in their head, trying to figure out when they lost control of your attention. They start to realize that the peace they feel when you were around wasn't from themselves. It came from you. You were the calm in their chaos, the anchor in their storm, the light in their confusion. When you take that away, their world feels a little colder, a little emptier, a little less meaningful. And that's when they begin to miss you. Not because of your words, but because of your energy. It's important to understand that energy doesn't beg to be seen. It simply is. When your energy is strong, grounded, and authentic, it carries a vibration that others can feel even when you're silent. People who once dismissed you start feeling uneasy. They don't know why, but something inside them senses that your spirit has shifted. You're no longer emotionally available. You've detached your emotions from their validation. And that detachment speaks volumes. It says, I am no longer giving you access to what you didn't value. When you withdraw your energy, you begin to recharge. You start feeling your strength again. You start realizing how much of yourself you gave away, trying to make someone else feel whole. You begin to see how your constant giving was never balanced with receiving. And that awareness becomes your awakening. You no longer chase after validation. You stop performing emotional labor for someone who never noticed your effort. Instead, you invest that energy into your healing, your peace, and your growth. The person who once fed off your attention will notice this transformation. They will feel your detachment, not because you said anything, but because the energy between you has changed. Every word left unspoken, every text left unanswered, every meeting you didn't initiate. All of it sends a silent vibration that shakes their comfort zone. You're not punishing them. You're teaching them through your stillness. Silence has a language, and it only speaks to those who are ready to listen. Energy is not lost when you withdraw. It's redirected. You take back what you gave and reinvest it into your own soul. You start pouring into yourself with the same devotion you once gave to others. You start nurturing your dreams, your mind, your spirit. And in doing so, your energy becomes magnetic again. Not desperate, not needy, but powerful. People can feel when you've reached this level of self-possession. They can sense it without a word being spoken. That's because energy doesn't lie. It always reveals where you truly stand. When you no longer feed someone's ego, you expose their emptiness. When you no longer respond to their emotional games, you expose their insecurity. When you no longer chase their attention, you expose how dependent they were on your validation. That's the beauty of silence. It reveals truth without argument. The less you say, the more they feel. The quieter you become, the louder your energy grows. And soon, they start to realize that what they thought was replaceable was actually rare. That what they took for granted was the very presence that gave their life balance. They start to understand that your energy was the force that made everything feel alive. They begin to crave it again. That warmth, that peace, that light. But it's gone, and your silence keeps reminding them of that loss. Energy withdrawn is not absence, it's a presence in another form. It's a statement that says, you no longer have access to me till you learn to value what I bring. People don't value what's always available to them. It's human nature to take for granted what comes easily, to overlook what remains constant, to underestimate what doesn't demand attention. When you are always there for someone, answering every call, forgiving every mistake, showing up no matter how they treat you, they stop seeing your effort as a gift and start viewing it as an expectation. That's how familiarity begins to breed blindness. They stop noticing your kindness because they assume it will always be there. But the moment you withdraw your presence, something powerful begins to happen. Your absence creates awareness. The silence becomes the mirror that forces them to see what they had, what they lost, and what they never appreciated. It's easy for someone to overlook you when your energy is always within reach. Your consistency becomes invisible to them because they built comfort on it. They no longer ask how you're doing. They just assume you'll always be fine. They no longer cherish your effort. They expect it like air. But when you step back, when you stop showing up the way you used to, the balance shifts. Suddenly, the energy they took for granted is gone. The warmth they relied on turns into distance. The constant communication fades into quiet. That quiet begins to haunt them because now they have to face the truth they've been avoiding. You were the one holding everything together. Absence has a way of making people see clearly. What was once dismissed becomes desired. What was once ignored becomes remembered. The same person who barely noticed your presence begins to feel uncomfortable in your silence. They start asking questions they never cared about before. They start wondering what went wrong, when it started, why you stopped reaching out. That's the power of absence. It forces reflection. It makes them see what words could never explain. You see, people only wake up when the comfort they relied on disappears. When you stop making them a priority, they start realizing how much they depended on your energy. Your absence becomes a lesson wrapped in quietness. It teaches without words. It corrects without confrontation. The lack of your attention becomes louder than all the arguments you ever had. They start noticing how empty things feel without your laughter, your messages, your presence. They begin to see how much color you brought into their dullness, how much peace you gave to their confusion, how much love you offered even when they gave little in return. When you were always there, they believed your patience was endless. They thought your kindness was guaranteed. But when you pull back, when you choose not to respond, when you decide to focus on yourself, they begin to feel the void that your energy used to fill. That void isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. It unsettles them because your absence exposes their dependence on your presence. They start feeling an emptiness they can't explain. They may try to distract themselves to fill that space with other people, activities, or noise, but none of it satisfies them. Because what's missing isn't just a person. It's the peace, stability, and love that only you carry. The beauty of absence is that it turns the unnoticed into unforgettable. The same presence they once ignored becomes the one they crave. The same energy they overlooked becomes the one they seek to feel again. But by then, your silence has already done its work. It has revealed their blindness. It has shown them that they weren't dealing with something ordinary. They were dealing with something rare, something pure, something that doesn't come twice. The absence of attention creates awareness not only in them, but also in you. When you stop pouring into someone who no longer values your effort, you start seeing yourself more clearly. You begin to realize how much of your peace you sacrificed to keep something alive that was already dying. You see how much energy you wasted trying to prove your worth to someone who was too distracted to notice it. Absence doesn't just teach them, it heals you. It gives you space to breathe, to reset, to remember who you were before you started begging for attention that should have been freely given. The more you pull back, the more you begin to see reality as it is. You see who reaches out when you stop chasing. You see who checks in when you go silent. You see who values your presence without your constant reminders. Silence exposes what words tried to hide. When you remove your energy, you reveal who was truly connected to your heart and who was only connected to your availability. And as they start to realize what they lost, the shift begins to unfold within them. They start remembering every moment you made them feel seen, every conversation that brought them peace, every act of care they never acknowledged. The memories they once dismissed now replay in their mind with a sense of regret. Your absence has turned into their teacher. It's teaching them that love shouldn't be assumed, that loyalty shouldn't be taken lightly, that presence is a privilege, not a right. There is a unique silence that follows when a good heart withdraws. It's not filled with anger or resentment. It's filled with truth. The truth that says you had something valuable and you didn't see it. That truth lingers in the air long after you've stopped speaking. It becomes a shadow that follows them, a quiet reminder of what they once had access to but no longer do. That's the awareness absence creates, a deep, undeniable realization that you were the light in a space they didn't know was dark until you left. Absence creates awareness because it takes away the illusion of permanence. It teaches that nothing lasts when it's not appreciated. It opens the eyes of the ungrateful and strengthens the heart of the giver. And while they wrestle with the emptiness your silence leaves behind, you begin to rediscover the fullness within yourself that never depended on their acknowledgement. Detachment is not the absence of care, it's the presence of clarity. It's the moment you realize that you cannot keep losing yourself to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You can love someone deeply and still choose to step back when that love starts costing you your peace. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you start feeling without letting those feelings control your actions. It's emotional maturity, the kind that says, I can care about you without allowing you to drain me. You stop responding to chaos with chaos, and instead, you begin responding with calmness, with silence, with understanding that peace is worth more than attention. When you detach, you are no longer driven by the need to prove your worth to anyone. You stop chasing validation from people who can't even validate themselves. You no longer beg for time, for affection, for clarity. You begin to understand that love without respect is just manipulation dressed in sweet words. Detachment teaches you to observe instead of react. You see things for what they are, not for what you want them to be. You stop painting over red flags with hope. You stop trying to convince someone to see your value because you realize that anyone who's meant for you will never need a presentation to recognize your worth. In detachment, there's freedom, not the loud kind that celebrates rebellion, but the quiet kind that whispers peace. You start waking up without anxiety about who texted, who called, who noticed you. You start focusing more on your own energy than their absence. It's not that you don't care anymore, it's that you care differently. You care enough to let go. You care enough to stop trying to control what isn't yours to control. You care enough to protect your peace because you finally see that constantly fighting for someone's attention isn't love. It's self-neglect disguised as loyalty. Detachment doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow unlearning of habits that once made you feel safe. You stop over-explaining. You stop overthinking every silence. You stop justifying someone's inconsistency as confusion. You start realizing that your emotional stability is your responsibility. You can't expect someone else to handle your heart when they can't even handle their own. You start creating space between what hurts you and how you respond to it. That space is power. It's where growth happens. You learn that peace is not found in control, but in surrender. Not in having everything go your way, but in trusting that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. When you detach, people start noticing the shift. You're no longer as reactive as you used to be. Their attempts to provoke you fall flat. Their emotional games no longer work because your emotions are no longer accessible to them. You become unshakable, not because you don't feel pain, but because you've learned how to process it without letting it consume you. Your silence becomes their confusion. They start wondering what changed, why their usual tactics no longer affect you. That's the moment you reclaim your power. The moment you stop dancing to the rhythm of someone else's inconsistency and start walking to the beat of your own peace. Detachment is not coldness. It's warmth redirected. It's the ability to stand in love without drowning in it. It's loving with boundaries, giving with discernment, and walking away with dignity. You start realizing that not every connection is meant to be held on to, and not every person is meant to be kept close. Some people are meant to teach you lessons in self-worth, in self-control, in letting go. You no longer see endings as failures. You see them as necessary closures. You stop fighting for relationships that keep you in emotional debt. You stop arguing with people who don't listen. You stop explaining your silence because you finally understand that peace doesn't require explanation. The more you practice detachment, the stronger your sense of self becomes. You stop being defined by how others treat you and start being defined by how you treat yourself. You begin to understand that your value isn't measured by someone's ability to see it, but by your ability to honor it. You don't chase after people who walk away. You trust that what leaves is making space for what's meant to stay. You start living with a quiet confidence that doesn't need approval. That's the power of emotional detachment. It turns pain into perspective. It transforms disappointment into wisdom. It changes desperation into discipline. And slowly, your energy begins to shift. You no longer crave validation from others because you've built validation within yourself. You don't look for peace in someone else's chaos. You start noticing that you feel lighter, not because everything is perfect, but because you've released the need to control what's beyond you. Your calmness starts to disturb people who once thrived on your emotional reactions. They don't understand how you can be so still, so unbothered, so free. But you know the truth. You're not indifferent, you're in control. You've stopped giving your power to situations that don't deserve it. Detachment is not about walking away from people. It's about walking back to yourself. It's about returning to the version of you that existed before the emotional chaos. The version that didn't need to chase love to feel loved. The version that trusted their own presence more than anyone's attention. It's about rebuilding your boundaries, your self-worth, your spiritual balance. When you detach, you begin to experience peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. You stop trying to fix others, and instead, you focus on nurturing yourself. You understand that not everything requires a reaction, not everyone deserves a response, and not every situation needs closure. Some things are best left unanswered because your silence is the closure. You begin to live in a state of quiet strength. You become the observer, not the reactor. You can witness the same situations that once broke you, and now they no longer have power over you. You've learned that the more you detach from what's toxic, the more room you create for what's divine. Your peace becomes your protection. Your silence becomes your strategy. Your calmness becomes your confidence. And while others chase chaos to feel alive, you remain grounded in your stillness, unshaken by noise, untouchable in your peace. There is a certain power in disappearing without warning, without anger, without the need to make an announcement. It's a kind of silence that shakes everything that once felt stable to those who took you for granted. When you finally stop explaining, stop defending, stop showing up for people who never reciprocated your energy, you begin to move differently. This silent move isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about preservation. It's about realizing that your energy is sacred, your presence is valuable, and your peace is worth more than staying in spaces that dishonor you. When you quietly step away, you create a void that words could never describe. That void becomes a mirror for the one who once underestimated your worth. Disappearing without explanation is not cruelty, it's wisdom. It means you've finally accepted that some people understand your silence far better than they ever understood your words. You've spent months, maybe years, trying to express what you needed, how you felt, and what you deserved. But all those conversations fell on deaf ears. So now, instead of arguing about what respect looks like, you show it by leaving. You leave not because you stopped caring, but because you care enough about yourself to no longer remain where you're constantly overlooked. You leave without noise because you're done proving your point. Your peace no longer needs permission to exist. The power of disappearing lies in its unpredictability. People who took you for granted never imagined a day when you would no longer be available. They thought your patience was infinite, your loyalty unbreakable, your love unconditional. They thought you would always return no matter how they treated you. But when you vanish, no posts, no messages, no updates, confusion sets in. Their comfort begins to crumble. They start replaying every interaction, every conversation, every time they dismissed you, wondering what they missed. Your silence becomes their greatest mystery, their most haunting lesson. It whispers to them in ways your words never could. When you disappear, you reclaim your emotional energy. You stop wasting it on explanations and start using it for elevation. You stop trying to fix broken dynamics that were never built on respect. You learn that not every connection deserves closure, and not every departure needs an announcement. The ones who truly valued you will feel your absence without being told. The ones who didn't will simply wonder why their world feels less alive. That's the beauty of the silent move. It teaches without confrontation. You walk away from the noise and into the calm of your own growth. Silence creates curiosity, and curiosity often breeds realization. The person who once ignored your messages will suddenly feel the urge to reach out. The one who dismissed your efforts will start missing the comfort your presence brought. They'll check your social media, search for your name, scroll through old messages, trying to feel close to what they lost. But what they're really searching for is the energy that once made them feel seen, supported, and safe. That energy no longer belongs to them, and that realization begins to break them in silence. They start to understand that you were not just a person in their life. You were the peace in their storm, the stability in their chaos, the calm in their confusion. Moving in silence also gives you time to rebuild yourself. You begin to heal from the inside out, not seeking validation, not trying to be understood, simply choosing yourself. You start to enjoy your own company again. You wake up without the weight of disappointment. You spend more time creating, resting, dreaming, and growing. Your absence from their life becomes presence in your own. The energy you once poured into fixing others is now being used to restore your own soul. The world starts to feel lighter, not because it changed, but because you finally removed yourself from what was holding you down. Those who took you for granted begin to experience what it feels like to exist without your presence. They start to miss the energy you used to give so freely. The check-ins, the care, the understanding, the forgiveness. At first, they might think your silence is temporary. They might assume you're just upset, waiting to be chased. But as time passes and you remain silent, their confidence starts to fade. The longer you stay quiet, the louder the lesson becomes. They start to realize that you weren't dependent on them, they were dependent on your energy. The silent move is not about ego. It's about elevation. You've outgrown the need to explain your worth. You've outgrown people who only recognize your value when they fear losing it. When you walk away without warning, you shift the power dynamic completely. You stop playing the role of the giver and start standing as the one who chooses peace. Silence becomes your armor, not to protect yourself from love, but to protect yourself from disrespect disguised as love. Your disappearance becomes a statement of self-worth that says, I no longer need to prove what I bring to the table. I am the table. There's something incredibly unsettling about someone who moves in silence after being taken for granted. It forces others to confront themselves. It makes them realize how much of their confidence came from your presence, how much of their peace depended on your patience. While they're wondering where you went, you're not hiding, you're healing. While they're replaying your last words, you're rewriting your story. The more they search for you in others, the more they fail, because what they lost wasn't just a person, it was an energy, a purity, a loyalty they won't find again. The truth is, when you make the silent move, you no longer seek closure. You become the closure. Your absence becomes the consequence of their carelessness. You don't need to explain, argue, or prove anything. The silence does all the speaking. It communicates disappointment, boundaries, and self-respect in a language that can't be debated. They begin to feel the emptiness that once lived inside you when they ignored your pain. That's when they understand the true cost of taking someone for granted. It's not the loss of your words, it's the loss of your energy, your presence, your light. And once that's gone, nothing feels the same again. Silence is not just a reaction, it's a transformation. It's what happens when you've been drained for so long that you decide to turn inward and rebuild what was broken. You reach a point where words no longer serve their purpose, and your silence becomes the space where healing begins. You stop trying to change people and start changing your perspective. You stop expecting apologies from those who will never understand the damage they caused. And instead, you give yourself permission to move forward. This silence is not about ignoring others, it's about listening to yourself. It's about hearing the quiet voice within that says, you deserve peace, not confusion. You deserve presence, not promises. You deserve growth, not guilt. When you choose silence, you shift your focus from reaction to reflection. You stop wasting time explaining your pain to people who benefit from your confusion. You begin to notice how your emotions used to rise and fall based on how someone else treated you. But now in silence, you learn emotional balance. You no longer depend on someone's validation to feel seen. You no longer rely on someone's presence to feel complete. Silence teaches you how to fill the spaces you once tried to fill with others. You start realizing that healing doesn't come from chasing closure. It comes from creating inner stillness. Silence becomes your teacher. It teaches patience when your heart wants to react. It teaches understanding when your mind is filled with questions. It teaches surrender when your soul is tired of trying to control outcomes. In that stillness, you begin to rediscover yourself, the version of you that existed before heartbreak, before disappointment, before betrayal. You start reconnecting with your strength, your dreams, your peace. You begin to appreciate your own company, finding beauty in solitude rather than fearing it. You no longer look for distractions to escape loneliness because you start realizing that solitude is not loneliness. It's self-restoration. As silence transforms you, it also begins to speak for you. The people who once ignored your words begin to feel the shift in your energy. They can sense that something in you has changed. You've become calm, detached, unbothered. The same things that used to trigger you no longer affect you the same way. The same people who once had power over your emotions now find themselves powerless. That's the beauty of silence. It reclaims what chaos once controlled. You no longer react impulsively, you respond intentionally. You no longer seek revenge, you seek release. You stop trying to prove your worth and instead embody it quietly. The silence that transforms you is not cold or cruel, it's sacred. It's a period where you cleanse yourself of everything that weighed you down. Resentment, anger, disappointment, self-doubt. You begin to detox your spirit from the noise that once distracted you. You start realizing that every time you argued, defended, or explained, you were giving away energy that could have been used to build yourself. Now, that energy flows back to you. It nurtures your peace, strengthens your confidence, and sharpens your intuition. You become more selective about who you allow near you, not because you're bitter, because you've learned how precious your energy truly is. In silence, clarity arrives. You begin to see who truly cares and who only cared when it was convenient. You start noticing how some people only showed up when they needed something from you. You remember every time you poured love into empty spaces. And now you realize that silence is how you protect yourself from doing that again. You stop explaining your absence because those who value you won't require an explanation. The rest will notice your distance and understand that their behavior created it. Silence becomes your boundary, firm, gentle, and undeniable. Transformation in silence doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you move. You start walking differently, slower, lighter, more intentional. You begin to speak less but mean more. You start to see through people's intentions with greater clarity. You no longer chase connections, you attract alignment. Your silence becomes magnetic because it carries power, not